Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with the Wellness Way Yorkville. This is take two. If you're joining us right now, say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. I realized last night I was streaming through our software that it for some reason captured the wrong room. So it was just recording an empty chair that I was not present in. And I was looking at it, I'm like, why is there not a lot of people online watching? And that was because they didn't want to see an empty room with no one there. So I'm going to do what I talked about last night that didn't get recorded with the slides. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do it again. So, guys, if you are watching right now, say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. It's so good to see you. Hopefully, you can see me as well. So, if you can see me and you can hear me okay, just give me a thumbs up. All right. All right. So, this is take two. So, but I'm going to talk about this because I talked about it last night on Instagram only because I was using my phone, not streaming software. So people were actually able to see it, but they didn't get an opportunity to be able to see the slides. And I really like when people are able to see the slides because it just helps to get the message across just a little bit better. So I'm going to talk about tonight salt and stomach cancer. Okay. And if you saw some of the headlines that just came out, the reason why I'm talking about is this: I had someone who sent me this and they were freaking out. Um, and this is, if you're just a headline reader, you'll look at this. This came from, I think, People magazine, and it said adding table salt to your food may increase stomach cancer risk by 40%. And I'm going to go over the actual study, and I'm also going to go over the importance of salt and why really table salt is not adding anything to stomach cancer, and why this is just nothing but fear porn. And to get people to read the headlines and then totally swear off any kind of salt or anything like that. So I'm going to talk about that study here in just a second, the importance of salt. And guys, if you are from the Chicagoland area, please make sure that you get registered for our next upcoming inflammation talk. This is Tuesday, June 4th at 6:00 p.m. This is an in-person event. So make sure you get registered for that. And guys, if you have any health concerns, get registered for that as well, because we're going to talk about a lot of different things and how they're related to the inflammatory process, weight loss resistance, cancer. I'm going to even talk a little bit about cancer tonight, infertility and hormone issues, thyroid disease. I'll talk about a little bit of thyroid tonight when we talk about stomach acid, things like that. Joint pain, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune conditions, and even hormone issues. You understand that hormones respond, especially to inflammatory triggers and stressors, and everybody's trying to balance their hormones. But in reality, the body knows exactly how to balance your hormones. It just doesn't need an overabundance of different kinds of stressors. So, guys, if you're from the Chicagoland area, please make sure that, and you want to work with us, please make sure you get registered for our next event. It's going to be Tuesday, June 4th. This is an in-person event. And guys, it's very easy to register because if you are on any of our pages, all you have to do is just go up to our Linktree profile and you will see at the very top, it says inflammation event. Just click on that right there. and then it'll take you to Eventbrite, and you'll be able to register for that in just probably about a minute or so. And then we'll reach out to you in order to confirm your attendance at that event. So please make sure that if you are registering for it, you are in fact going to show up, because our staff does a lot of work in order to make sure that you guys get an incredible experience on that night. We also have a gift for you as well for those people who attend that event. Now, I actually just updated our link tree, and it includes something else. And this has to do with what I'm going to talk about next week as well, about how to keep your air clean. But I'll go over at the end what I'm going to be talking about next week. And it's very, very important. I think people need to know about this, or at least have a basic understanding of it as well. So here's the headline: adding table salt to your food may increase stomach cancer risk by 40%. Okay. And this is what I'm going to talk about. Now, if you read headlines, you're going to look at that, and immediately, your brain is going to say, I should not add any kind of salt to any kind of food. I need to swear off anything with sodium and whatnot. But I'm going to show you that your body needs sodium. And I'm going to show you why it's so important when it comes to stomach health, when it comes to gastrointestinal health and things like that. Okay. Now let's actually look at the study. Let's not look at the headlines, but let's look at the actual study. Adding salt to food at table as an indicator of gastric cancer risk among adults, a prospective study. This was published about a month ago, and usually it takes a month before people start to catch on. If you saw some of the other studies that came out and said skipping breakfast can cause, heart attacks, and people literally thought that time-restricted eating was causing them to have heart disease, unless you actually look at the study and you see how ridiculous the study methods were. So the first thing is anytime that I see something like that, someone sends it to me, I want to look at how did they get the information? How did they get the information? And that's called methods of data collection. So if you look at the actual study, here's how they got the data. So they looked at, and this was from the United Kingdom, and they looked at about 500,000 people, but the frequency of adding salt to food was obtained from a touchscreen questionnaire completed at baseline. I love the questionnaires because most people they don't remember what they ate a week ago, and it's all relying on memory. It was like, well, how often do you add salt to your food? And it's like always, never, sometimes, and that's how they came up with that data. So it's a memory recollection type of data collection. Now, the results during a median follow-up period of about 11 years, there was 640 gastric cancer patients that were recorded. The gastric cancer risk among participants reporting adding salt to food at their table, as always, compared to those who responded never or rarely, had a hazard ratio or an increased risk of about 41%. Okay. Now, on the surface level, you might be like, oh, well, it must be salt. Okay. But just remember this. I'm going to talk about this a little bit deeper, but just remember this. The number of people who developed stomach cancer over about a 10-year period was 1 in 746. And when you look at the data collection of how they obtained and how they came up with these results, it's kind of like the studies that I have critiqued in the past. There was one about red meat and diabetes, in which they looked at how much red meat people were consuming based off of memory, saying in the last month or so, how often do you eat red meat? But one of the things they didn't even take into consideration was what the red meat was with if it was with a lot of processed carbohydrate and things like that. And then also, I did a whole live, if you go back a few weeks ago, about intermittent fasting and heart attack. And they concluded that intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating within a certain window increased risk of heart attack. But the problem was that the people weren't actually intermittent fasting consistently, number one. Number two, it didn't take into account what they were actually eating as far as their diet. And then number three, there was huge racial disparities between the control group and the people who were actually intermittent fasting. And that, for example, and I've talked about this, African Americans have a much higher risk of diabetes and heart disease, cardiovascular disease, than people who are Caucasian. And yet the study in which they made those determinations had a much higher percentage of African Americans in that actual study. Okay. So there's a lot of problems with that study. And even if you read the study about adding salt to food and increased stomach cancer risk, They actually said, yeah, there's a lot of limitations to some of our conclusions. And here's what they said. While our study based on large cohorts suggests that always adding salt to food at table is also associated with a higher risk of gastric cancer in Western populations, it has several limitations. Case numbers in our study were not sufficient to evaluate the influence of potential modifiers such as sex, age, ethnicity, infection, or whether they even smoked or not. Okay. So they're not even taking into account if somebody even has a previous H. pylori infection, or even if they smoked, or even looking at their age or sex or anything like that. So they're taking out, not even considering some of the largest risk factors for people having stomach cancer in the first place. Okay. So what are some of the stomach cancer risks? What puts you at a higher risk for stomach cancer? Well, smoking, drinking, and infection. What do you mean, Dr. Nate, about infection? I'm talking about an H. pylori infection that I'm going to talk about a little bit deeper here in just a second. But those things will definitely increase your risk for having stomach cancer. But I also have a breaking news announcement based on extensive studies and observations that 100% of people who sleep actually die. You can imagine if they came out with the headlines, it came out with the news. In a new study, 100% of people who sleep end up dying. And that is this whole correlation causation type of thing. Just because people may eat more salt at foods doesn't take into account what their lifestyle is, doesn't take into account anything in regards to that. And just because there is a correlation with people who sleep that end up dying, it doesn't mean that sleeping is actually causing them to die. Okay. In fact, you actually do need sleep. Men, you need at least 7 to 8 hours, and women probably 8 to 10 hours every single night. Okay. So let's go to the Cleveland Clinic. And here's what the Cleveland Clinic, renowned health organization, health group, they talk about stomach cancer. Here's what they say. Prevention of stomach cancer. They say you can't prevent stomach cancer, but you can reduce your risk. Here's how you do it. Number one, treat H. pylori infection if you test positive. H. pylori infection is a significant risk factor for developing stomach cancer. More on that in just a second. Treat ulcers, gastritis, and other stomach conditions promptly. Untreated stomach conditions, especially those caused by H. pylori bacteria, increase your risk of stomach cancer. And then they say, those things, just eat healthy, avoid smoking, avoid tobacco products, and maintain a healthy weight. And at the end, they just talk about eat a healthy diet, maintain a healthy weight, don't smoke, don't drink, don't do those things that people actually know as well. I know I love it when you talk to your doctor and say, how exactly should I eat? Can you talk to me about it? And they're like, yeah, just eat lots of fruits and veggies, and yeah, just, start doing that. But if you have a fire, we'll just give you a bunch of medications for it as well. So Cleveland Clinic talks about risk factors for stomach cancer. I'm going to give you a different perspective, and hopefully this will make sense to you. But here's the question I'm going to ask. What if many cancers are a response to a chronic infection or repeated injury? What if many cancers that people suffer with, not necessarily all, but what if many of the cancers that people suffer with are actually due to a response by the body to chronic infection or repeated injury? Guys, if you look at esophageal cancer, also known as like Barrett's esophagus, if someone has Barrett's esophagus, they have a lot higher risk of esophageal cancer, and a lot of it has to do with their body refluxing stomach acid and really causing injury to the esophageal lining. But what if you look at a lot of cancers? What if it's just due to repeated injury or just carrying a chronic infection? And I'll give you an example: esophageal cancer, even stomach cancer. What about colon cancer? You can look at those things and see that the colon's not doing very good and very inflamed. And think of this: what if the body is actually trying to adapt to it as much as possible? And what if that cancer is actually a protective mechanism, meaning if that tissue doesn't change, then it would die a whole heck of a lot earlier. So the tissue has to change in order to be able to withstand a very volatile environment within that area. That's just a different perspective. And a lot of people don't like to hear a different perspective because it makes them think, and it causes them to have a little bit of cognitive dissonance when you talk about a different perspective. But this may help you with a different perspective, because this is how the body responds to repeated injury. You guys ever heard of myositis ossificans? Here's what it is. Myositis ossificans is a condition where bone tissue develops in skeletal muscle, often in the quadriceps muscle of the thigh. So it's usually at the front of the thigh. It's most common in young, active people and athletes and often occurs after an injury. Myositis ossificans is characterized by bone formation, which can vary in location and incidence. So this is just a fancy word for saying this: I'm growing bone within my muscle. Now, here's what's so interesting is I've had it. I had myositis ossificans, and do you know when I got it? It wasn't because of like bad genes or bad luck or anything like that. I got it when I playing basketball, and I got kneed in the thigh terribly about 3 times within a span of about 6 weeks of getting kneed in the thigh. And after about 3 weeks, my thigh started to develop bone into that area. And it wasn't the body messing up, it was the body trying to adapt to a repeated trauma. And I want you to think of this. If I'm consistently getting a repeated trauma in the same area, my body says, I need to protect this area. Maybe I should start laying down some bone in order to protect that thigh muscle. So I started to develop some bone formation into that area. But one of the first things I had to stop doing in order to make it worse was to stop getting kneed in the thigh. And that's why we talk about changing what is causing the injury. And I talk about this in the inflammation talk, as I say, what if the reason why you're here, what if it's not because of an illness? What if it's because of a repeated injury that you haven't figured out yet? And if I keep falling down the sidewalk and skinning my knee, if I did that every day for 3 months, I wouldn't go to the doctor and say, why won't my knee heal? Do I have chronic genu scabitis or something like that? I need a fancy name for it. No, I have a repeated injury that I haven't allowed to heal. My body is starting to adapt to it as well. So this is how the body is smart, and it's always trying to adapt. So the question comes down to this: is do you need salt? Dr. Nate, do you need salt? The answer is yes, 100%. And here's why you need salt. If you look at the membrane of the nerve system, you're going to see how does the nerve system generate a nerve impulse, otherwise known as an action potential. And you're going to see when you look at this, one of the things that you need is you need sodium, and you also need potassium. So sodium and potassium are pumped in and out. That generates an electrical current along the nerve system, otherwise known as an action potential. So just right there, you need sodium for your nerve system to function. You also need sodium and salt for heart function. But what a lot of people don't realize is that you need sodium chloride in order to produce stomach acid. You need it for stomach acid. Well, Dr. Nate, what on earth is stomach acid? Well, stomach acid is produced by your stomach. Specifically, if you look at this, and if you're looking at a microscopic view, it's made by what are known as your parietal cells. Parietal cells make hydrochloric acid, otherwise known as stomach acid. What's the purpose of stomach acid? By the way, your body doesn't make too much acid. Most of the time, it's not making enough acid. Okay. And that's what can cause some problems with reflux and things like that. So stomach acid is needed for a couple of functions. Number one, you need stomach acid because you need that to sterilize your food. And if you're chronically low in stomach acid, I guarantee you're going to be carrying infection within the gastrointestinal system. It's there to sterilize your food. I'll give you a perfect scenario. 2 people eat the same meal. One gets food poisoning, the other one doesn't. What's the difference? Their ability to be able to sterilize their food within the gastrointestinal system. But what's interesting is if you look at the anatomy of the stomach, you'll notice that the bottom of the stomach, there's a sphincter there that lets food to go through, in which you're going to have the release of digestive enzymes and also bile, which is very important. But that's called the pylorus of the stomach. You have a sphincter there, and it's known as the pyloric sphincter. Now, what I just talked about was H. pylori, okay? H. pylori. People think they catch H. pylori, but H. pylori is actually normal bacteria around the pyloric sphincter of the stomach. That's where it's supposed to live. So why does it crawl up and start to infect other parts of the stomach? Well, you need a low stomach acid environment, because once you change the stomach acid, you change the environment of that bacteria. So now it can live in different parts, and it can start to infect the stomach tissue and cause ulcers and things like that. So that's why, guys, people think they're catching bacteria all the time, or they're catching bacteria, within the gastrointestinal system. I'm like, it's really an overgrowth, or you're providing an environment for it to grow in other places. Okay. So this is why you absolutely need stomach acid to sterilize your food, number one, and then number two, to help you break down your proteins. Low stomach acid from the Cleveland Clinic is called hypochlorhydria. What is hypochlorhydria? Here's what the Cleveland Clinic says. Hypochlorhydria means low stomach acid, specifically low hydrochloric acid, or HCl, which is the most powerful acid your stomach produces. I agree. Hydrochloric acid plays an important role in your digestion and also in your immune system. That's also true too. It helps to break down protein and absorb essential nutrients, and it helps to control viruses and bacteria that might otherwise infect your stomach and also the gastrointestinal system. If you have hypochlorhydria, you'll have trouble digesting food properly, especially protein. Okay. If you want to have a real big problem with digestion, don't break down your proteins and you'll develop a lot of food allergies. Over time, you could develop serious nutritional deficiencies. You'll also be prone to infections, which can cause further damage to your stomach and digestive system. Maybe it's not salt. Maybe it's hypochlorhydria. Okay. But they didn't look at that in that study. Okay. So if you are chronically low in stomach acid, here's some of the things that can develop. Number one, low iron, because you need stomach acid in order to absorb iron. You might be deficient in B vitamins like B12, which can actually, those two together can make you chronically anemic. You may have a really hard time breaking down and absorbing proteins. You can carry infection. But think of this. You also may develop what's known as SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which means without enough stomach acid, those bacteria that are living in the colon can crawl into the small intestine because it's just a better environment for it. And you can also develop intestinal hyperpermeability, otherwise known as leaky gut. That can also cause some big time inflammatory issues and some immune system issues, and things like that. Okay. Now, here's some testing that I want to go over with you. And this is a woman very, very stressed out, very, very stressed out. And I wanted to look at this for a very specific reason. And also, she had some issues with I can't lose weight even though I'm eating right and things like that. So I wanted to look and see if she was actually digesting, breaking down her proteins, or she was carrying a lot of infection and things like that. So this is a IgG and an IgE food allergy test. And then also Genova stool tests. We look for 3 days because we're also looking for a parasite as well. Now, if you look at this, she's got 26 different IgG reactions. And IgG actually describes the type of immune system response. This is not something that your doctor is going to test for. This is not something doctors are only testing for IgE type reactions, many times using a skin prick. Very rarely they're doing a blood test. We do look at some IgE reactions. In fact, I remember I just had a patient not long ago had 4 different IgE reactions out of the 8 that we tested in there. So we know that stomach acid is a really, really big issue for her. And she's the first one to say, yes, it absolutely is. So she's not breaking her proteins down very well. But then in addition to that, she also is carrying infection. So she's carrying some pathogenic bacteria. Now, guys, I want you guys to understand, it's not like she just caught it, but she probably does a very poor job as far as sterilizing her food, which just allows those bacteria to continue to grow and thrive because the environment is perfect for it. Okay. Now, if you continue to see, she's got some more indications of having a lot of issues. You can see that her ferritin is very low, which is stored iron. You need stomach acid to be able to absorb iron. And then you can see that her C-reactive protein is very elevated. This is a very important marker, C-reactive protein, because it elevates when there's infection. I've seen people have a terrible infection going on, and I've seen their CRP jump up to in the 50s. And it's like, well, I understand why that's doing it, but you don't want to stay that high for long periods of time. And in fact, you'll actually see people with a lot of autoimmunity. They'll have very high C-reactive protein. You also see they'll also have a lot of heart disease in the absence of high cholesterol as well, which means that heart disease and cholesterol just is not a this for that type of thing. So you can see she's very inflamed. You can also see her hormones, specifically coming from the adrenal glands, are very, very low as well. And also very low very low iron levels too. So you have to ask the question, well, what lowers your stomach acid? And I will say this, it's stress. And everybody wants to say it's mental stress, but there's more than one different place of where stress is actually coming from. You can have mental stress, there's no doubt about it, but you also have chemical stressors and you also have physical stressors. That's what we talk about in the inflammation talk. But if you carry a lot of mental stress, that's going to put you into fight or flight, which is not good for stomach acids, not good for digestion. All of that starts to shut down, which is why your life's mission should be to help you get better into what's known as rest and digest, which is controlled by the vagus nerve, especially. So fight or flight or rest and digest. That's what you need. Those are the two divisions of your autonomic nerve system. Most people are spending a lot of their time into fight or flight, which is very, very poor for digestive health and stomach acid production. So the question comes down to is where are you getting your sodium from? Okay. Where are you getting your sodium from? And if you see a lot of doctors, they talk about a low salt diet. You need to be on low salt, no salt. And I'm like, you realize that being on a low salt diet can have some very negative consequences as well. But it's important to understand, where are you getting your salt from? Okay. Let's go to the Mayo Clinic. What foods have sodium? And here's what they say. Most of the sodium in the typical American diet, which is really bad, by the way, comes from processed or prepared foods. These include bread, pizza, cold cuts, bacon, cheese, soups, fast food, prepared dinners, such as pasta, meat, and egg dishes. So a lot of pre-prepared food. And then also a lot of processed food is also going to have a lot of sodium in it. And guess what? You shouldn't be eating those foods anyway. So if they talk about the standard American diet, you probably should run, because there's usually either a lot of sodium in it, or there's also a lot of monosodium glutarate, or MSG, or yeast extract. And I tell you what, guys, getting yeast or any kind of MSG or type of all of the different names that they have it would benefit a lot of people. And the reason why is people do have a lot of yeast allergies when we test them. And this is baker's yeast, also brewer's yeast, in the form of alcohols, beers and wines and cheap liquor and things like that. So you shouldn't really be eating those foods anyway. And if it's positive on an IgG food allergy or IgE food allergy test, you have to eliminate it from your diet. You have to take the stressors off of the immune system. So let's talk about the effects of a low sodium diet versus a higher sodium diet on blood pressure, renin, aldosterone, catecholamines, cholesterol, and triglyceride. This comes from Cochrane Database Systematic Review 2004. So this is about 20 years old. And they looked at this. They said, what happens if we put people on a really salt restricted diet? And here's what they found. Okay. They found people on a very low sodium diet found a significant increase in plasma or serum renin, which is produced by the kidneys, by 304%. They saw an increase in aldosterone, which is an adrenal hormone. It has something that has things to do with regulation of blood pressure, 322%. They saw an increase in noradrenaline by 30%, a 5% increase in cholesterol, and also a 4.6% increase in LDL, and also a borderline increase in adrenaline and triglyceride with a low sodium intake as compared to higher sodium intake. So here's what's interesting. You go a low salt diet and it increases your cholesterol and it increases your LDL. And the doctor says you need to go on a low salt diet, and you go on it. And then all of a sudden you see your cholesterol go up, by 10 or 15 points. And then the doctor is like, see, I told you, you're not doing a very good job. Now you have to go on some of these medications for it as well. And I've also talked about what statins actually can do when it comes to fatigue and muscle function, and things like that. Now, I talk a lot about this in a previous live. This is probably about a year ago, but you go to our YouTube page, just look for Dr. Nathan Thompson and then type in, are you on a low salt diet? And you'll probably be able to watch that, because I talked for about an hour about a low salt diet and how that can cause some issues when it comes to your adrenal glands and to, problems with fatigue, and why potassium is actually very, very important. When I was young, I had always had elevated blood pressure. Not one doctor ever said, maybe you're potassium deficient, which I guarantee you I was, because I ate a lot of junk food. I was very potassium deficient. And when you sweat, you lose a lot of sodium and you lose a lot of potassium. And if you are potassium deficient, you'll actually see as a response of the body to start to increase blood pressure. So I talk about that on a low salt diet on that live. Go back and make sure that you watch that as well. So what do I need to do? Okay. What do I need to do when it comes to hypochlorhydria? is that number one, you always need to lower stressors. And this isn't just mental, this is chemical, but this is also physical stressors. This is why we talk about the role of the spine and the nerve system as with stress perception and things like that. You know what's interesting is I just had a woman, a wonderful woman, who literally for 3 years couldn't sleep unless she took medications for it. And for the first time, I just followed up with her. For the first time in 3 years, she can fall asleep without needing some kind of medication to be able to sleep. And it's not witchcraft, guys. What did we do? We're really good at finding the stressors and emptying out the stress buckets so the body goes into a more relaxed state. This is why it's not just all chemical, but it can be physical and it can also be mental too. That's why our number one supplement or herb that people get is called California poppy. Okay. Number two, make sure that you are getting tested. And this is why food allergies, stool, and doing some blood work can be very important for you, but also make sure that you're getting salt. And I recommend unrefined sea salt. So it can be Celtic salt. I actually prefer Celtic salt only because the grinder doesn't contain nickel in it, because some of those grinders over time, they can start to degrade and you can start to get little particles of nickel in your food. I believe this is still true. Celtic sea salt actually has a stainless steel grinder on it and it doesn't contain nickel. You can also do pink Himalayan salt as well, but you need 1 to 2 teaspoons of unrefined sea salt. And then you also need to make sure that you're getting potassium. So how much potassium should you be getting? It's very tough, but the RDA is 2,600 to 3,400 milligrams per day. And I've seen almost no one get enough potassium in their diet. The problem is you need to eat about 10 avocados per day just to get enough potassium. And this is why, guys, you need to get so many veggies and fruits in order to get enough potassium, but most people just don't. And no, I don't believe that bananas are the best source of potassium. I think avocados is that. I don't even get enough potassium. And I will actually supplement with potassium, probably about 1,000 milligrams every single day, just because I don't get enough when it comes to my diet. By the way, you can't really test for potassium because 98% of it is intracellular. It's not floating around the blood. It's stored up within cells, especially. And this is why, guys, when you talk about the whole system, your body is much like a Swiss watch. Look at a Swiss watch, open up the back, look at all the gears. And it's like, if you ask someone, which one of the gears can you take out and keep accurate time? People are like, you need all of the gears. And I'm like, that's how your body runs. So when someone says, oh, you don't need your gallbladder or you don't need your appendix, you need all of those in order for the body to start running the way that it's supposed to. But this is how we look at the body. We look at the body as a Swiss watch and we look at it complex, but we understand how a problem in one area can, cause the body to adapt in other areas. This is why if you want to improve skin, improve the gastrointestinal system, you'll see the skin start to get better. But what do we do instead? If we have a skin issue, we go to a dermatologist and they look at the skin and they try to manipulate the skin around with, antibiotics or, Accutane or whatever it is. But the body, if you understand how the body works, then you're going to understand, no, it's a lot more complex than that. But guys, this is why if you understand this Swiss watch principle, and people who have a hard time understanding it, they end up on 35 supplements. Whether you're naturopath or whether your health coach or whether is prescribing 35 different supplements, it's because they're trying to do a this for that approach. And that's what we don't want to do. Is we don't want to give you a this for that approach. We want to say, hey, if we can improve the function here, it's going to start to cause changes in other parts of the body. And a lot of times people will ask me, they'll say, what labs would you recommend? I'm like, it doesn't matter. Because if I told you what labs you need to get, you wouldn't know what to do with it. That's the problem. So make sure, guys, that you are working with a Wellness Way doctor who knows how the Swiss watch principle is actually working. And this is why, too, guys, if you're from the Chicagoland area and you want to work with us directly, please register for our upcoming inflammation event. This is an in-person event. This is at our office at the Wellness Way in Yorkville, Tuesday, June 4th at 6:00 p.m. But we talk when you look at everything, people are like, oh, this makes so much sense. And I want to help you because I believe doctor means teacher. And if we can help you bridge that gap, then you'll understand the next logical conclusion that I need to do is to make sure that I'm doing enough testing and assessing my body to truly what it needs and where there is some hidden inflammation that you may know it's there, but you don't know the first steps in order to start helping with it as well. So next week, oh man, I'm like, I don't know if I should even open up this can of worms, but I'm going to. Next week, guys, I'm going to be talking about mold. Okay. I'm going to be talking about mold from a simplified perspective because this can become very complex. No, I'm not talking about environmental mold. I'm going to be talking about water damage mold. And if you are in a house that contains water damage mold, I'll talk to you about the symptoms that you can experience. I'll talk about some of the first testing that you can do when it comes to that. But I'm not going to go over any quote unquote protocols or anything like that because different types of mold require different coaching when it comes to that. But I'm going to talk about water damage mold and why a lot of people may not be feeling very good. But if you have been working trying to get your health back, I'm going to show you some of the symptoms of why it starts to change your hormones, why it can cause weight gain, why it can cause problems with the skin, why it can make you feel like your head's underwater, why you can have exercise intolerance, why you can even have MCAS or mast cell activation syndrome, all of those different things. And you need to be looking for mold, especially not just in the house, but you can have mold in the body from other things that you are putting into the body as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that and where you need to start when it comes to that. So I'll talk about mold next week. That will be on Memorial Day, providing I don't stream to an empty chair like I did last time. So that'll be on Memorial Day. So that'll be a week from yesterday. So make sure you join us then. And guys, if you enjoyed this broadcast, make sure that you follow us, make sure that you like it, make sure that you share this as well. If we can reach people and it can help them on their journey to health and help them live a better life, help them live a longer life, and help them to live healthier, then I'm 100% for that. So make sure that you share this video. And as always, guys, I love you all. I appreciate all of you. I hope you have an awesome and wonderful rest of your week. And we will see you on Memorial Day. All right. Be well, be blessed. Remember who you are.